Welcome to Total Training's Adobe Dreamweaver CS5 Essentials. I'm Dee Sadler, an Adobe freelance professional, Adobe certified instructor in over 5 programs, Adobe user group manager, and Adobe community professional for the Creative Suite and regular speaker at conferences. In this Essentials training, we'll learn how to start from a flowchart to wireframe to designing and working with CSS. We'll add interactivity, use templates, and learn how to test and publish your site. We'll start by learning the environment in Dreamweaver before we create our first site. The very first time you open Dreamweaver, you might end up with a little dialog box that asks you to define a site. You can just click Cancel out of there. We won't be defining the site right at this very moment. Now you'll be able to see your Start screen. Your Start screen is a place that you can open a recent item. You're going to be able to see 10 of your most recent items from here so that you can quickly just click on it and open the file back up again. You can also open an item from here. You can create a new HTML, Cold Fusion, PHP, CSS, and even create a new Dreamweaver site from right this very window. You can also take a look at the top features in video form of Dreamweaver CS5. But let's go ahead and take a look at an actual file so we can take a look at our panels. I'd like you to go to your File menu. We're going to go to Open. And in your project files, in your Chapter 1 folder, there's a file called dwenvironment.html, and I'd like you to open that. Once this file is open, let's take a look at our window first, and then we'll take a look at our panels after that. The very first thing that we see in the upper left-hand corner are 3 buttons. We have a code view, so that you can work in just the code if you're more comfortable with that. We've got a split view. Split view is highly recommended because you can see both the code and your design view all at the same time. The design button does just that, let you work in just the design view. The next button over we have is our live code. Our live code lets us see JavaScript working in our page. If we had some spray elements that we wouldn't be able to see normally, when we see it in live view, in conjunction with the live view button, we would be able to see the code changing in our code view as well. Now the Inspect button is a brand new button that we have for CS5. I'm going to go ahead and have you click on the Inspect button. When you're in the Inspect button, you're able to see live view as well. When I roll my cursor over an element on my page, I'm going to be able to see the padding and the margins for that particular element. This is especially helpful in making sure that we are managing our CSS properly. So for instance, if you have a little extra spacing in an element on your page, you're going to be able to tell exactly what the problem with that spacing is and with the Inspect button. Go ahead and turn that off. And the live view off. Now we have a browser button. So if I want to actually see my page in a browser instead of just in my window right here through live view, I can open up a browser. My visuals is my next button over. That allows me to see whether I want to choose to see my table widths or my layout backgrounds for my CSS, etc. I get to choose which things I would like to see and which things I don't. Next over is our title button. Our title button is very important with Dreamweaver. Dreamweaver allows you 3 places that we can title our document. You don't want to end up with an untitled document in the end, so we always suggest that this is the very first thing that you do is title your document when you first open up your page. My final button with my little arrows is making sure that I can upload my file and download files from the server, but we won't be doing that just yet. So now just click on your page to deselect your text. Now let's take a look at the bottom of our page. The bottom of our page is a very important little feature in Dreamweaver. Now it's been around for a long time. It's not a brand new feature, but it's one that's important nonetheless, and that's our tag inspector. Our tag inspector allows us to choose elements on their page easily just by where your cursor happens to be sitting. In the moment my cursor happens to be sitting in my list items, so I see body, UL, and LI tag. If I were to click the LI tag, then it selects the list item for that particular bulleted list. Further down, we have our selection tool, a hand tool for when my page gets full and I need to move my page around. a zoom tool that lets me zoom all the way up to 6400% if I wish, the size of my page as far as weight goes, so that what's 1K and how many seconds it takes to download, and it says that it's Unicode UTF-8, which has all to do with my special characters and how they're displayed on my page. So let's take a look at our Property Inspector next. Our Property Inspector has two buttons on it. I have an HTML button and a CSS button. Depending on what I have selected on my page, my Property Inspector changes to reflect the options for that particular element. At the moment, I happen to have some text on my page, so I see my formatting, I have an ID, I have a class, I can make a link if I need to, and just a few other features here. If I take a look at my CSS button, I see that I have a targeted rule for my LI tag, and I can always choose a new CSS, or I can see my cascade from here. I can edit a rule from here, and I can see my default font and the size of my element that I have on my page. Next, let's take a look at our panels and our workspaces. If you're familiar with other Creative Suite applications, you might also be familiar with being able to change your workspace. If we take a look at the top of our screen, we'll see that right now it says Designer, and there's a little arrow that has a drop down to it. If we go ahead and click on that Designer and change that to Coder, for instance, we'll see that your page changes to Code View and that your panels move over to the left-hand side, and you're able to see your Files panel more specifically. Let's go ahead and change that back to Designer, and we'll see that if I click up here, I also will see underneath all of my different workspaces that I can reset Designer, I have a new workspace, and I can manage workspaces. So let's take a look at some of our panels so we can see what things that we might want to have over on the side. If I take a look at my window menu, I have all of my panels available. So even ones that we have over there already have a check mark next to them. So for instance, if I'd like to see my behaviors, I can have that added over to my panels on the right-hand side. And if this is how I like to work, then I can come back up either to my window menu or where it says Designer at the moment. And I can pull down to Workspace Layout and New Workspace. And I can just name it. Say OK. And now the next time I make changes, this is available to me in my drop-down as the very first thing. So let's take a look at the panels on the right-hand side just to know what you have available to you, and then we'll take a look more in depth a little bit later on. The first panel that you'll work with on the regular basis is my Insert panel. My Insert panel, if I double-click it, I have a drop-down for Common, Layout, Forms, Data, Spry, In-Context Editing, Text, and Favorites, meaning that I can make my own favorites. So just even in the Common tab, I can do simple things like hyperlinks and emails and a named anchor, etc. The next panel that we work with on a regular basis is our CSS styles. If I click on the All button right now, I actually have a style sheet applied to this particular page, and I can see my body styles and my paragraph styles and my heading styles. The next panel that we'll work with on a regular basis is our Files panel. Our Files panel allows us to manage our sites and see what files that we have available. As long as we work within our Files panel, you're going to be able to do much more in Dreamweaver later on. For instance, you'll be able to check your links site-wide, and you'll be able to make sure that if you move files around and move pages around, that Dreamweaver will help you make sure that all your links work properly. The Assets panel is a panel that we will also work with on a regular basis. It's a place that we can see all of our images, we can see all of our colors, links, flash files, video files, templates, and library items as well. When you open up your preferences, it's going to be in a different spot on the Mac as it is on the PC. On the Macintosh, you're just going to be able to go underneath your Dreamweaver menu and Preferences. On the PC, you're going to go underneath your Edit menu and Preferences. When we open up the Preferences panel, we're going to take a look at some of these, not always in depth, because Adobe has done a really great job of making sure, for the most part, that the right things are actually checked. In our General category that we have open right now, This is where you can change whether you want to show the start screen or not. So show welcome screen right here is making sure that every time I now open Dreamweaver, I will actually show the welcome screen. If you choose not to show that screen, then here we can make sure and uncheck it so it does not come back open again. At the bottom of that particular panel, I see that I have a maximum number of history steps. At the moment, it's set at 50. This isn't like a program like Photoshop, where my history steps take up so much memory that I can't run my program if I change my history steps. So feel free to go ahead and bump up your history steps if you feel the need to. Now, the history steps can be a great way to also make actions or make a command that we can do over and over again inside of Dreamweaver. So making sure that you see extra history steps can be very beneficial in the long run. Let's go ahead and check on the accessibility category. You're going to see that your form objects, frames, media, and images are checked by default. What this will do is make sure that you put accessibility along with your objects. If I have a form and I have any kind of element that I would place from my form onto my page, such as a comment field. So if I have a text box that I want to put on there, that have the user give me a comment, it's going to ask me whether I want to put a label with that or not. Labels are a way to include accessibility. If I have media and I want to put a flash file out on my page, it will ask me the same thing. Do I want to title that particular element or not? And is just good accessibility. Same thing with images. It'll force me into putting an alt tag along with that particular image. AP elements. AP elements is something that we don't use all that often in Dreamweaver, although it is available and there are reasons why we would choose an AP element. An AP element is an absolutely positioned item, such as a layer. So if I want to put a layer on my page and place it wherever the heck I would like, it is absolutely positioned by the X and my Y coordinates on my page. This is just a preference for how wide and how high and what color background I would like that particular element to be by default on my page. Code coloring. When you very first start working with Dreamweaver, you probably won't be messing with code coloring all that often. But for instance, if you work with Dreamweaver for a little bit, you might want to change a few things. So it's on my HTML element right now, and if I click Edit Coloring Scheme, and I take a look at my preview, so for instance, if I click here on Comment, I see then it automatically changes styles for HTML comment. I have a text color and a background color, so if I don't want my text for a comment to be gray, I can just change this to another color as a default. So now my comments will be orange instead of gray, and they're easier to see on my page. Code formatting. Code formatting is a way that, especially if you work inside of your code view and you're typing your own codes, code formatting is a way to make sure that everything is lined up exactly the way you would like to see it. Now, code, you could write it all on one single line, but it's a lot easier to see if it's all lined up properly. Code hints. All in how you like typing your code. Now, if you're brand new to Dreamweaver, code hints may not mean a whole lot to you at the moment, but if you've used Dreamweaver very much at all, code hinting means a lot to you. When I type something in the code view, Dreamweaver allows me to see my code hints right away. So if I type div and a space, it'll then ask me, well, what do you want to put in here next? So making sure that I have a zero delay is very helpful. Now, closing my tags after I'm typing, the very first thing after typing my bracket and my forward slash, it will go ahead and close it for me. Otherwise, after I type the end of my opening tag, it will close it for me, or just never, and I would have to do it myself. Really just personal preference whether you like either the first one or the second one, but it will help you in the long run in writing faster code. Code rewriting. Now, I find this to be a category that is helpful to actually choose a couple of these that aren't checked by default. So when rewriting code, do I want it to fix invalidly nested and unclosed tags? Absolutely. Do I want it to rename form items when pasting? Sure. And also remove extra closing tags. Now, when I choose that, when I remove the extra closing tags, It will then now ask me, well, do I want to warn when fixing or removing tags? Absolutely. Please warn me in doing so, because there may be times when you don't want Dreamweaver to fix that for you. So I'll go ahead and check all of those boxes. Our next category is copy and paste. Now this is very important, especially if you're copying and pasting from other programs like Word. So this is just a default. When we actually copy and paste, we can also do a right click and make sure that we do a special paste so that if we don't want our default, we're able to choose a different option. So just text only allows me to put just text only inside of my page. Now if I have 2 paragraphs and I choose text only, I will end up with 1 paragraph. So it's very important that you understand that it is going to get rid of paragraph spacing as well as everything else. Text with structure. Do I want to just see my paragraphs, lists, and my tables without any other formatting? Or do I want to see my text with structure plus basic formatting? So I will at the very least see my bolds and italics. But you have to be careful with this, because depending on the program that you're copying and pasting from, you may end up with more unwanted things in your code besides just your bold and italic. The very last option is our text with structure plus full formatting. So from Word, it's going to go ahead and bring in all of its special formatting, and if you have a paragraph, you're going to end up with a div at each individual line of your text in your paragraph. Probably not what you would want, and probably not the best option. Do I want to retain my line breaks, and do I want to clean up Word's paragraph spacing? Absolutely. Our next category is CSS styles. When working with CSS styles, I can use a shorthand. Now when you're very first working with CSS and very first learning CSS, you may not want to choose shorthand, but once you're working with it for a little while, you're going to want to go ahead and use shorthand. So for instance, a background. If I want to use a color, and the color is going to be black, black is designated with 6 hexadecimal numbers, 000000. So for shorthand, I only need to put 000 instead of all 6. If I have a margin and padding, basically what that means is I've got at the top of my page, the right-hand side of my page, the bottom, and the left-hand side of my page. It always goes in a clockwise motion. Now normally if I don't use shorthand, that's designated as margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. But I don't really need to put all that. I can just put margin, colon, 0, semicolon, and that equals the same thing as if I would have put all 4 lines of code in. So CSS using shorthand in the long run is very beneficial, but in the very beginning, don't feel like you have to worry about it. When editing CSS rules, do I want to use shorthand if original used shorthand, according to the settings above, or open CSS files when modified? Really, that's totally up to you what you'd like to choose. The very last one is when double-clicking in CSS panel, edit using CSS dialog box, property pane, or code view. Again, that's totally up to you. Next category is file compare. Now you won't see anything else other than a browse button here because Dreamweaver doesn't do this on its own. You need a third-party program to be able to choose file compare with Dreamweaver. Now what you would be comparing is your local files versus your remote files. And again, Dreamweaver can't do it effectively, so that requires a third-party program. File types and editors. When looking at file types and editors, what I can open in code view. So for instance, do I want to see CSS files, TXT files, ActionScript files, etc.? Do I want to enable BB Edit integration? If I don't want to choose that, I can choose my own external editor. What do I want to have as an extension editor? So for instance, if I have a PNG file, what editor do I want to open that particular PNG file? Now I can have multiples, but I can also have a primary that goes along with that. Same thing goes with my PSD files, my FLA files, etc. Font category. We really won't mess too much with this particular category because we're going to use CSS for pretty much everything inside of Dreamweaver. But the code view we'll take a look at is size 7 by default. That may be a little small, so we're going to change that to 10 points so that we can look at our code view and we can actually see what's going on a little bit easier. Highlighting. Highlighting really simply just lets me choose what color I want associated with, let's say, a library item. It's a pale yellow, and if I have trouble seeing that, I can always change the color. Invisible Elements category, here's where I'd like to make sure that we see our elements such as line breaks when we're working inside a Dreamweaver. So go ahead and click on Line Breaks. New document. How do I want my new document set up? Do I want it set up with an HTML? Do I want to set up with HTML? Just make sure that you're consistent. If you start with HTML, stay with HTML and don't name anything HTML. If you stay with HTML, don't choose HTML. You won't get messed up that way. We have our document default type. So for instance, right now it's set at XHTML 1.0 transitional. But I also have everything from HTML 4.01 transitional all the way up to HTML5. Yes, I said HTML5. I get to choose my default encoding. How do I want my special characters? So for instance, if I were making sure that I have a variety of special characters in here from Spanish, French, different types, I'd want to make sure that it's on my Unicode, but if I have something more specific, then I can choose that here as well. Preview in browser. So if you already have a browser like Firefox and Safari, both on PC and the Mac, if you have Explorer on the PC or even Chrome, you can make sure and have that put in your preview in browser preferences, and you can also choose a primary and a secondary browser here. Now the option below here where it says preview using temporary file, this is fairly important. If you do not choose preview using temporary file, it will make you save whatever you're working on plus what other file that you happen to be working on as well that goes along with it, like a CSS file. So for instance, if I don't want to have it save my file, and there are times when I don't, I can come back into my preferences, check this option, and it will create a temporary file for me though that has a bunch of numbers on it. So it is keeping track of what I'm doing just temporarily, and it will go away once I close down Dreamweaver. My site category lets me choose what dependent files, what FTP connection, do I want it to be disconnected after a certain amount of time, and one very important thing is my put options. Do I want to have it save my files before putting? This can save you a lot of time in the long run. So let's say you have a file that's open. You're going to go ahead and take your file in your file panel and put it up on your server. Maybe you haven't saved. With this particular option, it will go ahead and save your file before it puts it on there, and it will save you lots of time. Status bar is just a way for you to make sure that you're targeting the right browser. So for instance, if I want to target a 1024 by 768 browser, I want my width to be right around 955 and my height to be right around 600 in my file to take in consideration all the little parts and pieces of your browser window. I can also make sure and choose the correct connection speed. So when I'm taking a look at the window itself and I'm seeing how long my file is going to take to download, that I'm choosing the correct connection speed so that I know how long that will take my user to load my page. Validator. What do I want to validate against? So we're talking about doc types here, and we'll get more into what doc types are later. So let's just change it to XHTML 1.0 transitional, and we'll talk more about this as we go along. And click OK.